Okay, let's get started. Welcome to the last talk of the day. It's the last thing holding you back between the pub crawl and here, so we'll try to make it streamlined and fun. And this talk is banking on education. It's going to be a case study of some security training programs that we implemented at State Street Bank over the last 4 years. So since I'm going to be talking to you for the next 50 minutes, is it okay if I give you a little introduction? Since there's two of us up here, so you might want to wonder why. So my name is Rob Cheyne. I am one of the founders and CEO of Safelight Security Advisors. We're a security training company. Prior to that, I was one of the founding members of At Stake, and I'm looking around the room, I see a few of you in the room as well. So, welcome. And during the years, I've been a software developer, I've been a trainer, I've been a consultant. So I've really gotten an opportunity to see a lot of the different kinds of issues that happen and occur in the field. And as a trainer, I've had a really good opportunity to talk to the people that are making the mistakes and see where the disconnects are between what the mistakes are and how people understand what they are. There seems to be a gap there that we're trying to close. So with me is Jeff Richard. He's the Vice President of Security, Computer Information Security at State Street Bank. So
one of the few hundred vice presidents at State Street. But it is a good title, though, so I like it. I've never had that before. I've been doing security since 1990, so been doing it for a long time. I was in audit before that, this was purely going to be a joke, but I'm having trouble looking at the screen here. I just turned 50 over the weekend, so I'm officially an old bastard. I don't feel old, and I thought that was pretty cool until I realized I just don't remember what it is to be young anymore. So if I have a little trouble looking at the screen, that's why I'm into
like the big one, Jeff.
Yeah, trifocals and whatnot. I've been working with Rob now for 4 years? We've engaged in a official program for educating our developers on how to securely develop and acquire applications. I consider it to be phenomenally successful since we started from scratch, and that's what we'll talk about here today.
All right, cool. So let's just get started with the problem statement. Why are we doing this? Well, for people in this room, the answer is probably obvious. For people outside of this room, the answer is not so obvious. Right? The bottom line is systems are being exploited. And, there's insecurities, there's bugs. Developers make mistakes. Sometimes when I first go in and start teaching people for the first time, they get defensive, like they're going to somehow get fired because they coded a bug. It's like, come on, guys, everyone codes bugs. If you've never written a bug in your life, you've not written enough code, right? So it's not a big deal. We try to just put them at ease. It's no big deal. We're teaching you here. The really big issue that we ran into is just even at a company like State Street that has a lot of resources, the resources are limited. They're actually, you think, oh, big giant company, they have lots of resources, but the average 10,000 person company, if you just throw out a number, probably has, 1,000 IT staff, and only 5 or 10 of them are security. How many people are in your security group, Jeff?
Well, in my group, there's only 5 of us that are dealing. Excuse me, a timely bite of ice cube.
It's like the waitress when you say,
yeah.
How are you doing?
There's 5 of us in our group that actually deal with architecture issues and technical security solutions. We probably have 100 security practitioners of all types throughout the organization, ranging from business ISOs to network security folks and people that are, if we consider the admin security administration, is probably a little bit more than that, but a small percentage of the organization.
Right. So given that, the challenge becomes they can't be the traffic cops. They can't find all the problems for everybody. It's not possible, right? So you really need to empower people to be able to make their own decisions and be able to really look at the problems and address them themselves. So that by the time it does get to the security group, they've already addressed the really obvious problems. And I got to tell you, at this point, I think I've trained, 6,000 or 7,000 people over the last 4 years, and there is a stunning lack of understanding of security outside of this room. I still, to this day, give SQL injection demos because people haven't seen it yet. When I show them how to root a box from the login prompt, their jaws fall to the floor. I've had people get up and leave the room because they said, uh-oh, I have to go fix something. as recently as, this isn't like 8 years ago, this is like 6 months ago. It still happens. It's amazing. So really where we want to get to is taking these limited resources and expanding that knowledge out to the masses in a way that they can consume it. One of the things I'm going to talk about today is we are horrifically bad. I said this in the last talk, and I'll say it now. We as an industry, frankly, suck at talking to people that aren't security people about security, right? So we need to get better at that. I was joking with Dan. Go to a Toastmasters meeting or something. Learn how to speak in front of a group. It's an important skill. And I'll talk more about that later as well. So really what we want to do, again, is just take that awareness and raise it up. So most technology failures are ultimately human in origin. We make a lot of jokes about going to the RSA trade show floor and getting annoyed because we just see yet another smart card solution. But we're part of the problem. We complain about it, but what are we doing about it? Right? So really you have people, process, and technology are the three legs of that stool. And for some reason, we like to only solve the one. And yet, the reason's simple. It's easy to understand technology. You go and buy another firewall, go and buy your intrusion detection system. But if you're not training your people on how to use those things effectively, why bother at that point? In some cases, you're making the problem worse because you're giving them a false sense of security. Right? The false sense of security is probably the worst enemy of all. Right? If you think that you're secure and you're not, then you're going to do all kinds of things that you should not do. And that's the message we need to get out to people. People don't care about, the latest, greatest encryption or whatever fancy buzzwords you want to use. That doesn't mean anything to business people. It doesn't mean anything really to developers even. Right? As security people, we think that we have a message and we got to get it out to everybody and it's the same message no matter what. You really have to tailor that message depending on who you're talking to. One of the things I could, again, through years of doing consulting, I've seen some pretty interesting horror stories. My favorite one that actually, the person that I was on the consulting project with is actually in this room. We were on an engagement and we were talking to the customer, doing client interviews, the things you do in an architecture assessment. And we asked him, so how are you encrypting this very sensitive data within your system? And the answer was kind of circuitous. He said, we're not using industrial strength encryption. Now, I've been around the block once or twice, and to me, when someone says we're not using industrial strength encryption, it means whatever they're doing is crap.
That's a red flag, Steve.
So, yeah, that was a huge red flag for us. So we kept prodding him, and as the project went on, we wore him down, and he finally put the architect that developed the algorithm in the room with us, and we just grilled him for about a half an hour. And then after that meeting, we sat down with a piece of paper and a pencil, and we broke the algorithm in about 5 minutes. Turns out they're massively, oh yeah, this was great too. They said that our algorithm is stronger than DES because we have more bits in the key. I swear to God, they gave it to me on a written piece of paper that said this. And it turns out that what they thought was, 168 bits of entropy was 6. All bad. So we've seen some horrifically bad things, and it's really because we're not doing our job as security people of getting that message out to people in a way that they can consume it. This is the classic IBM study. The one that says that for a $1 bug during the design phase, that same bug exponentially grows in cost as you go further into the life cycle. This is one of the big reasons why we do training. Right? If you can start getting people to catch these bugs in requirements and design, you're going to save a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of effort, a lot of headache. So that's really where we want to get people to see is that security really is a process. Jeff, you want to add something?
Yeah, this is an incredibly powerful slide. This is something that
He's
we've
saying that
used.
because he made the slide.
Well, yeah. I have to credit IBM for this. I've got the statistics and what I looked at, and I've heard all kinds of different statistics, but a bug found at the beginning of development is $1 will end up costing you $60 if you have to go back from acceptance back into development to fix it. Now, granted, it does assume that you're testing for this stuff and you're going to go back and fix it. There are organizations, some that I used to belong to, that may just kind of ignore the whole process anyway and say, well, it's not going to cost me anything because I'm not looking. And that does exist. That's, I'm fortunate enough to be in an organization that recognizes the risk factors of not doing things the right way. So we can use this. I've used this to sell the program because management understands if they're going to spend the money to fix it and turn out a good product, why not do it right at the beginning, save a whole heck of a lot of time and money, and get some benefit out of the process.
Cool, thanks. All right, this is what most people do when they think about security awareness. They take their head and they plant it firmly in the ground because it's a hard problem. How do you train 10,000 people on what security is, you know? But if you don't solve the problem, what's going to happen when someone comes up and kicks you in the behind? You're not even going to see it coming. So really what we're trying to get to with these programs is to raise that level of awareness across the organization in a way, again, that is effective and consumable by the average person. Because we really do forget that we speak a different language than everybody else. So now Jeff is going to talk to you about some of the challenges that we faced implementing the program at State Street and some of the things we did there. So the next few slides are going to be for him.
And by the way, don't feel shy about jumping in with a question if you have one. Not that I assume anybody in this room would be shy about asking a question.
I see at least a few hecklers in this room, so I'm sure it won't be.
There are challenges. When you look at a program, and I'll be speaking from the experience of implementing the program at State Street, there are lots of challenges if you want to be successful. And, you know, we'll start with Jeff's first rule, and it really goes to any rule or any situation where you want to implement a security program. Okay, it's not mine, it's just common sense, but you really have to start with gaining management's understanding and approval and getting their commitment. If you don't have that, you ain't got nothing. You really need to start at the top, and you need to tell them why that they need to do this, which is the information that we just, gave to you. Put it in the business terms, make sure they understand what they're committing to, and understand the benefit that's going to be achieved and how the objectives are going to be achieved. And you can't just start with just can't stop with upper level management. The layers of management under the CIO also need to buy into that because, the middle layers of management is where things get done. You're going to need to go to staff meetings. You're going to need to talk to people. I was fortunate that my superiors in the security and risk world were able to get the ears of the key people involved in it. We bought into the idea that, we'll get people trained, and we will make sure that we send people to classes, so just schedule them. Very important. Granted, you got to get to the point where, and I think the hardest part of this equation is getting to the point where management's going to accept doing that. It's kind of like the old Steve Martin routine, how to get $1 million and not pay taxes. We'll get $1 million. Well, explain to me how to get the $1 million. And that is kind of the tough part. One of the things that we used, a real life example, we did a lot of pen tests, and management was noticing, we prompted them, that the same problems kept showing up over and over again as we do in the pen test. How do we correct these recurring problems? So we suggested we really need to get to the developers and educate them on secure practices. It's the most cost-effective way to start with this process and to get the best coverage. So that was the way that we got management's attention on that point. Making the courses relevant. There's a lot of off-the-shelf courseware that's available. And it's good stuff, and quite frankly, it's the core of all curriculums that are out there. But you need to be able to spin it and put it in terms of your particular organization. You need to understand what specific objectives and goals that you need to meet within your organization and integrate it into the development of the material and in terms of how you're going to deliver it and what are the expectations coming out of it. So it is important to understand the specific relevance in your organization. Yes, you will get benefit by sending all the developers to a generic course, but you'll get a lot more, in my opinion, if you tailor it for your specific organization. Okay, another big challenge is fighting the misconceptions that exist in the organization, typically at the project manager, project leader level. This is the Mel Brooks badges. We don't need no stinking badges anymore. And it still exists, right? You still have the problem? People are saying that? Of course, the response to that is that you just really need to excuse me, you really need to understand what you're trying to solve and why it is a problem. And that's where we go back to the whole selling the concept. And limited budget. It's a problem with all, thank you. Excuse me for a second. Limited budget is just a universal problem when trying to implement security. Once you can procure an amount of money to start a program like this, you want to be as effective as possible. So you really have to sit down and figure out how to spend the money. You know, how you're going to develop the material, acquire the material, and then deliver it. There's logistics involved in that. It's a challenge that you really have to sit down, work out, and come up with some solutions in order to be effective. So you're just not throwing a lot of money at it, because you need to show a return for what you're doing to management, and you need to be responsible in terms of, from a budgetary perspective, and not just go wild spending it, even if you've got the authority to do so. Limited in-house expertise. I mean, Rob alluded to this. To be a good trainer, to be a good teacher, you have to be articulate, you have to be intelligent, you have to be very, you have to understand what it is that you're trying to do. In this case, you have to understand security, you have to understand development. There's a whole gamut of things that you need to understand. If you're fortunate enough to have a person or persons like that in your organization, they're probably off doing other things too, and their responsibility isn't just doing training. Training is really a full-time job when you're talking about a large organization. You know, there's smaller groups. If you're working with 10 to 100 developers, perhaps you can get away with putting together a part-time initiative, but when you're talking about a large organization, particularly State Street, where we're talking thousands of developers and IT people, you really need to understand that this is it's a full-time concern, and you can't just suck the time out of somebody else that's really needed somewhere in the organization. So you have to look at this, what's needed from an expertise perspective, and incorporate that into your planning. Physical location. In our case, we're global. We've got to consider we've got developers all around the world. So how do you reach your development? Computer-based training is an option, and we're looking at that, and there's a lot of benefit to integrating computer-based training into your program. Personally, though, there's a level, my feeling is that there's a level of face-to-face training that's necessary to convey the message properly. There's nothing like sitting in a class and getting some good communication. That's two-way. That's not just listening, but that's getting some good communication between the trainer and the pupils that are in the class. Certainly you don't need that for all classes. You do need to, you know, maximize your exposure to the organization. You need to account for gaps in the training schedule. So this is kind of where computer-based training falls in my vision. But again, there really isn't any substitute for having that face-to-face training.
I think we have a question in the back.
I was going to make a comment that, in addition, computer-based training can be more expensive to develop and deliver than on location.
Yes.
I can vouch for that.
Yes. Absolutely. Okay. Staying current. You develop something, some content today, put together a class, and, you know, by the end of the week, it may be obsolete to some degree. You've also got the concern of keeping your staff current. It's dynamically changing. People are coming and going in the organization, so how do you keep the people base up to date? You've got to, this is all consideration. It's not a one-time event. You know, oh, we trained everybody in the course of 2 years, that's it, we're done, we're moving on to something else. Got to keep them current, got to keep them fresh. There's new ideas, there's new approaches, there's new problems, and there's the turnover issue. And tracking, well, we'll just just alluded to that, tracking the state and the dynamic environment. You got change, you got to keep track of what's going on. The people that you're dealing with today aren't the people that you're going to be dealing with 2 years from now for the most part. I've seen, we've got a location in China where we've had 400% growth over the past 2 years. So we've had to go back there 3 times just to hit people. Start off with 100. They've got over 1,000 people now, so it's growing astronomically. Okay. Successes. Successes are good. Successes help sell the program going forward. Makes you feel pretty good too. You can put it on your resume and just kind of get a general sense of accomplishment. So, the first one's easy. It's a no-brainer. It's just a statistic. 1,600 students trained globally over 3 years. That's pretty good. I mean, in itself, it doesn't tell me, or it shouldn't tell you either, whether or not State Street is better off. It does say that we were successful in reaching these people. Now, if you look at the third bullet, that we're seeing real improvement in web application development. More anecdotal, I don't have a way of measuring it statistically yet, something we need to work on, but we can tell by the number of issues that are coming out of the development groups. We can positively see, and we've reported up to management, we've seen less errors coming out of the groups where people have gone through training than the groups that haven't. And that's a big thing. That's something we capitalize on when we want to sell a program. Let's see. The material is a commodity. Okay, I alluded to the fact earlier that there are more than a handful of vendors that are out there that are selling content or are selling training programs, and if you look at them, and I looked at a lot of them, it's largely the same material. Quite frankly, most of us in this room could probably write the material. It is security common sense. Obviously, if we're talking about kind of hacks and attacks and how to, J2EE security codes and practices, you got to know something about that. But it's not rocket science. What I have found is the big difference is in the delivery of the material and the service that you're getting from the organization. So that's what I'm looking for. Content is content. When I look for a partner, I'm looking for how it gets delivered and the service around that. And I think that's the big differentiator from my perspective. Okay, important point. And Rob, again, this is just reinforcing what Rob said. You have to speak business or development. You're not speaking security. Put it in the language where people can understand. Obviously, business is the driver. For most of us, we are in the process of we're in the business of making money. Security is there to help us make the money, to do things right. I had a colleague that always said, he says, what's the purpose of a brake on a car? Most people answer, well, it's to stop you. And no, the answer is to let you go fast. So if you don't have a brake, you can't stop. Security is like that. It allows us to do business, and that's the way it needs to be looked at. I am having a heck of a time seeing this. Business needs awareness as much as IT. Okay, we're a little bit lagging behind this, but we've recognized this from the beginning. We focused on IT and development, but in fact, the drivers of development, drivers of IT are the business. We're creating the services, we're automating the services that are needed for business. Okay, so you sit down with the development group, and they understand what they have to do, and you're going through the training, and you're saying, okay, we're going to pen test, we're going to push testing out into the security process, we want you to code to a certain standard, we need some reviews, you got all this process out there, you're going to go to training, you're going to spend time, it's going to cost you a little bit of money. Everybody's going to sign up for that, right? Particularly since business is pushing them to get things out faster and quicker. Well, that's the rub. And we've had the development group say, you really need to get this message out to the business units, and we agree fully. And I think that's where something we've got to focus our attention on next.
But the number one question in the classes, the developers say, all right, this is great, I'd love to do this, tell my boss so that I can get enough time in the schedule to do it.
Right.
Because they're not being given the time to do it.
Right. What needs to be said is a full explanation of what the expectations are going to cost. To do things right, it's going to cost you something. Yeah, it's going to save you a lot in the long run, but the guy whose job it is to get a service to the customers in X amount of time may not understand it or is not prioritized on his list that way. He's looking, I need to get it out. The benefit of the organization is not necessarily number one on his list. But the business does need to understand what these expectations are and what's involved in a new paradigm that may be in place. And this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to engage change in the organization, have the development world go through all these processes, things they didn't used to do. So it is overhead, it is a change, it is cost, there's some additional cost that's on there. So it's important that the business community understand what this change is. But they also need to, if they understand the benefit, and they understand the mandate that hopefully is coming down from upper level management, there's the sell. Okay, more lessons learned. In-house delivery, we talked about this. If I want to do this in-house, it's a full-time job. That's why we've gone outside. In this case, outsourcing is a really, 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 really good investment for us. May not necessarily be for everybody, but based on our cost-benefit analysis, it works really well for State Street. Need to stay current. Talked about that. Talked about the need to constantly refresh our material. Over 3 years, we've done some tweaking. We start out in the we have a kind of a basic Security 101 class, and to get the attention, we talk about current events. Well, unfortunately, the current events back in 2004 are no longer current, so kind of have to stay on top of that. That's just kind of a real simple example of the need to stay current. But there's other techniques and approaches that do need to be integrated into the material if you're talking about them anyway, and they change over time. So there is a need to redo things. Also, we're going through this now. You're going to find when you start out, some things are going to be really good and some things are going to be, okay, in terms of the material that you're teaching. So you want to have the opportunity to tweak and move things in the directions that make sense for the organization. And again, that kind of goes back to the idea that you really want to focus in on what makes sense for your organization and not just a generic set of material. Management's attendance is really, really helpful. I had a VP of development, and this guy, I wish I want to make him a model citizen and my friend. This is a guy that I was involved in a security assessment of a product we looked at. We looked at solutions to a particular need from 3 different vendors, and of course, I made a security recommendation. There were 3 of them. One was a really good, really secure product. Second one was okay, it didn't have too bad. And third was just like, oh, unbelievable, don't even pick this one. So of course they picked number 3, right? And after a year, pretty much everything was falling apart, and this guy had to go back and put a lot of security back into it. So his next project comes along. He's like, I want to get you involved right in the front, right in the beginning of this. And I also want my people to get trained on how to do this right so we don't have problems. And I was like, wow, this is great. This guy got it. And when you're targeting the management level, middle management, project managers, you will get more of that epiphany from this group. They'll sit there, and one of the classes that we gave, we talked about the cost of fixing a bug. And so the person said, well, why aren't we moving this more into development? And I said, hallelujah, that's what we need to do. We need to get more people behind that so we can get the funding and the momentum to move it into development and get you guys on board in terms of changing the development life cycle and incorporating on it. So there really is a plethora of opportunity when you get this level of management in. Now the real challenge with that is to convince this group that it's worth their time to come to the class anyway and to go through this. Typically, we found that they send their cronies, they send the lower level people, they send the worker bees, which is good, but really the management and the leadership has to be there too so that they can make sure that the right things get done. That is really important. That's something you really have to work hard at. And then finally, the planning and support. This is pretty much a third of my time. I don't have a formal training department that I can lean on in the organization. That kind of got disbanded when we had some inverse growth a couple years ago. So I'm pretty much doing the logistics and the planning, and it does take a lot of time, and you got to make sure that you can get these classes set up. And I can't tell you the number of times. The first year that we did it, when we go to different sites to give the class, every single time there was something different.
One time I showed up, and the projector bulb burned out, and I said, "Where's the other projector bulb?" They're like, "It's in the projector." Turns out it had already been used. I had to sit there and say, "All right, slide 2, slide 3. I did that all day, 8 hours.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and this was, I had requested a lab with 12 computers on it because it was the lab course that we have, and we got a lecture hall. So it's like, and another reason why you're looking at service as a differentiator from the vendors, Rob was able to adjust on the fly and give a lab course in presentation mode. The fact of the matter is you're going to run into these problems constantly, so you got to be able to adjust and plan as much ahead as you can and expect the worst when it comes down to actually delivering it, particularly if you're outside the main headquarter area.
All right. So I'm going to talk for a little bit about general guidelines for teaching. So this is one of the things that we tend to miss out on, and I actually wish there were more of the technical folks in the room, because what I'm actually going to do now is in line with what Dan was saying earlier, which is I'm going to share what I've learned over the last 4 years. So what it comes down to it is these 3 things will make your presentations effective. So get people's attention. How do you do that? Any way you can. If you have to get off the podium, say, "Wake up. You have a problem. Don't you get it?" Right? Sometimes you really have to get in people's faces almost. I've had classes where you show up and there's like the guy in the back of the room with his feet up on the desk and the newspaper. And you're like, "Come on, guys. Are you here to learn or what?" And what I've learned, though, is that there's some simple ways you can address this. Every single human being has this little voice in their head that talks to them all the time. And if you have any doubts about that, it's the voice in your head that just told you there isn't one. Right? So you can start to address people's little voices before the issues come up. So in the first beginning, when I first started teaching this, I get the hecklers. I get the people that don't want to be there. They want to make me look silly. And then in some cases I've, fought yang with yang and, made them look silly back. But that's not the answer. The answer is to really address the problems before they come up. So here's one of the ways I do that. So I'm going to share with you just all the things I do in the intro that sets the context for the rest of the day. Because if you show up and you just start talking about encryption and certificates and all this stuff, people's eyes are going to roll into the back of their head and they're going to check out for the entire day. You might as well have not even been there. Right? So what you really want to do is you want to show up and you say, "Look, how many of you by a show of hands are here because you chose to be here?" And people kind of chuckle because they were all made to go there by their managers or this guy, And then you say, "How many of you by a show of hands are here because somebody told you you had to be?" And you'd be amazed. Just by doing that one thing, people drop their guard and they're open to what you have to say. It's unbelievable. Just one little thing, these little tiny things you do shift the entire context of the conversation and really allow you to get your message into their head in a way that they'll understand it. Another thing we do, every single time I start a class, I start out with headlines. Here are real incidents that have happened, guys. This isn't just make-believe. This isn't just some theoretical thing that doesn't really happen in the real world. Here are real incidents. We do a couple pages of these just to show them. I also do what I call security mythbusters. I go through all the things that people screw up. Firewalls make us secure, not. SSL makes us secure, not. And I just go through and I rattle them off and I talk about every single one of them, all the obvious things, but people haven't been educated. They've never had anybody in a single room stand up and say, insiders really are more dangerous than outsiders. Because you built the damn systems, you know how they work. Right? So when you do that, people are like, "Oh, yeah, I get that." And then the other thing I also always do is I make sure that I convey what they're really up against. And, you know, with my background at Stake, I can just tell them I know scary people and tell stories of things I've seen and done over the last 10 years, and they're like, oh, really? So one of the things I always do, and again, I'll share this, feel free to use this, steal it, please steal it, because it's effective. I'm sharing with you the things that I've learned that are effective over the last 4 years teaching 7,000 people. When I go in, I say, look, what you're up against are people that think differently than you do. They don't just show up at their desk at 9 o'clock and just, hang out until lunch, go to their lunch break, come back, and then code, do whatever they do, and then at 5 o'clock they leave. That's not what the people you're up against do. They wake up at noon because they were up until 4 in the morning the night before. They start the day with 3 cans of Red Bull stacked up at their desk, and they just chug them down, and they just hack away. And I've seen penetration tests where guys sit for hours and hours and hours. You don't hear a word from them, and suddenly out of the blue you hear, yes! That means you just got owned, right? We've seen this. So I convey this to them. I tell them this, but then I give them some real-world examples. I say, look, guys, we make bad assumptions. And I say, for the purposes, just for fun, for today, since you have to be here anyway, let's just play a game. It's called That Can't Happen Really Can. Right? Because that can't happen, quote unquote, is how we get in. Every single time. Nobody ever broke into a system because of something that could happen or should have happened. It's because something that shouldn't have happened, that wasn't supposed to be there. And when you say this to people, they're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And then they just drop their guard and they just listen. So another way I explain this is I say, look, imagine you put a lock on a door. What assumption do you make when you put a lock on a door? What do you need to get in? The key. Thank you. I thought there were security people in this room. So if you don't have the key, how do you get in? Explosives. I love that answer. Thank you. Right? You can kick it in. My favorite is just crawl into the window. Or, I usually tell the story about how back in the year 2000 at the RSA conference, Kroll Ligero was giving out lockpick sets. And I was like, really? They're allowed to do that? Get out of my way, I want one. And I ran over there and got my lockpick set and went home and, read everything I could find about picking locks and bought about a dozen locks and spent, I don't know, at this point I'm pretty good at it. And I tell them this, and they're like, oh. And I'm like, look, guys, your application security controls are exactly like the lock picks. When people that are breaking in, they're using SQL injection, it's like picking a lock. They're not using the key, they're using something else. Right? So by doing these things and saying that in this way, people drop their guard. You're now able to spend the rest of the day getting the message in. And that's what's important. Because if you show up and just blah, 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 encryption, blah, 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 certificates, blah, 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 passwords, people just tune out. You might as well not even be there.
Yeah, and one of the hardest concepts, I think, for organizations, people in organizations to understand, and this is natural, the insider threat, right? The people that work for them, they're not bad. These are my friends, my colleagues, they're my subordinates, I hired them. They're not bad. How can they possibly think about doing something bad? I trust them. I throw out the statistic, there's 20,000 people in State Street. Are they all gruntle? There's going to be there's going to be at least one disgruntled person in that crew, right? Somebody who's got a drinking problem, somebody whose wife or husband left them, somebody who just, the Patriots got screwed, all right? There is going to be one disgruntled person out of the 20,000. Statistics tell you that.
Yeah, that's my rule of thumb. That's
right. It's up to us as security practitioners to protect the organization. But as an individual, you have to understand that this is going to happen, and situations change, and it's a dynamic environment. And that kind of gets people's attention when you throw out the statistics.
If we're sharing things that people can steal, I'll throw one in right there, which is, even if you did trust everybody on the inside, what's the first measure of success of an external attacker is to gain the authority, access, and whatever of an insider. Hence, if your security regime is resistant to insider attack, you're solving the outside attack problem as a side effect. Isn't that better?
It's a good point. Excellent point.
Right. So that's the get people's attention part. The next part is just make it relevant. Again, if you start talking blah, blah, blah security, it's not relevant to people's day-to-day jobs. They don't care. You need to get into their world and figure out what do they actually care about. We did the panel earlier today, and we had a CFO up here saying, look, I don't care about security at all, really, except for the fact that I don't want to go to jail. So from that point of view, from her point of view, it's all about risk management. Am I doing enough to technically meet the requirements so that I can actually focus on my job? So it's really important to understand what is the job of the person that you're trying to communicate to, or it doesn't happen, it doesn't sink in. Again, you also have to make it real. If you notice, when I talk, I give a lot of real-world examples of things I've actually done, things I've actually seen. Use this technique. It's very, very effective. When I leave classes, one of my most common comments on the comment forums is, I really like the stories. I want more stories. I want a whole class of just stories. You know? I'd love to give that class. That'd be fun. It'd probably be a 2-week course. All stories. So you want to get people's attention, make it relevant, and make it real if you want to be effective at doing this. So I've spent a lot of my time on that. But really, again, identify your target audience. You know, an IT person is going to get a very different message than a business person or a management person, right? Define your objectives up front. What message are you trying to convey to the audience? Define that ahead of time. Before I came in this room, I decided, all right, after watching a lot of the talks, I've noticed that people aren't good at communicating about security. So I decided that's going to be my message for this talk. That's the only message. I want people to be better. You know, one hint point is don't use 6-point font on your slides. I have pretty good eyesight. I was in the back of a room today, and there was a slide up there that I was like, are you kidding me? Like, it's a useless slide if I can't read any of the words. I was sharing with Dan, I'm like, Guy Kawasaki says that the rule of thumb is you take the oldest person in the room and divide by 2, and that's the smallest font size you should use. And it's roughly true, you know? So, you know, if you're dealing with 14-year-olds, yeah, you can use 7-point font. But we're not here. So, you know, you notice on this slide, giant font, and I did all the talking. It wasn't like a million bullet points of all the things I want to say. You know, don't riddle people with bullets. You know, I give a little bit of information on things, slides like this because I want something for people to take away. But by and large, you notice I'm not speaking directly to the slides. I'm just talking, having a conversation. Which actually is another good point. When you're in front of a room, I see this a lot. People kind of put on this act. They're like, I'm in front of a room, so I have to act like I'm TV. I have to act like a TV person, and I talk funny. Look, guys, if you're giving a presentation to a group of people, it's the exact same thing as if I'm talking to one. Right? I'm talking to you, I'm talking to you, I'm talking to you. You look at each person as you're and you're having a conversation with them. And it doesn't matter that it could be 5 people or 10 people or 1,000 people. It doesn't make a difference. It's still a conversation. So if you define your key message up front and stick to that as you're presenting. Again, I wish that some of the more technical people were in the room to hear this, so I'm hoping this will be a reason for them to buy the DVD. All right.
$9.95. Order
So
today.
the key messages that we came up with for the training at State Street were pretty simple. You know, information security is critical. In the classes, when I actually deliver the classes, I mean, I weave in a lot of stuff. But at the end of the day, I ask them, what was the key message? And they say, validate input, sanitize output. Because I tell them in the first 5 minutes, I say, look, guys, if you can remember only one thing from this entire class, if you can remember to validate your input, everybody's better off. And then I'll have done my job if you just remember that one thing. And if you're really the smart kid in class, you can remember 2, sanitize your output, right? So we also want people to build security from the start. That's one of our key messages. You know, don't wait till the end. When we were at AdStake, I remember taking client calls from people that said, we have this great application. They spent a half an hour telling me about how great it is and how cool it is and it's the next greatest thing since sliced bread. And they say, oh, by the way, we're going live next week. Can you come assess it for security? like, really? You're going live next week. Oh, yeah, this is on Thursday. They're like, oh, yeah, Monday. Monday we're going live. We want you to test it tomorrow. Like, you're kidding me, right? Again, leverage the organization. One of the key messages I like to give is don't reinvent the wheel. Do not build another authentication mechanism. If I see one more smart card vendor at RSA, I'm going to have to kill somebody. Stop building the same thing over and over and over again. It's even worse when it's in-house versus a vendor. At least they're vendors. They have, that's their own burn rate. Information security really has to be achieved from the top down and the bottom up. It has to be driven from the top. There has to be somebody at the top that believes in it, that says, and usually it's the CEO, that says, this company will be secure. And everybody is measured by how secure it is. But then you still have to get the people from the bottom up to believe it. I don't care how much arm waving and screaming and shouting you do. If you don't get people on an individual level to get that security is important, they will still put their password on a sticky note on their monitor. Right? So again, employees have to recognize that attacks are easy. By the time they leave my class, they know that their attacks are easy. Because I usually spend the morning scaring the crap out of them. I just go through attack after attack after attack, just showing them, here's just a few things that could happen to your systems if you don't do the right things, right? So then when we spend the rest of the afternoon reassuring them, it's really okay. I know you need a hug now, but we'll make it okay now by showing you how to make it better. But we really instill the importance of a healthy paranoia. Be afraid, but be only afraid enough. You don't need to be so paranoid that you don't want to leave your house. I've had people, in the beginning, when I didn't realize this, in the beginning I just made people paranoid. I had people leaving the room, they're like, I don't even want to use my computer anymore. So, you want to have the right level of paranoia and instill the right level, guys. That's one of the things. As security people, we do a lot of arm waving. Say, it has to be secure, we have to build a vault around everything, including the whole building, But it doesn't need to be that way. We need the right level. It's always a balance between business and security requirements.
Yeah, not only that, but we found you need to be careful about when you're teaching them, particularly around hacks and attacks. Guys, don't do this. Look, learn, but don't particularly execute this from your desktop, because a corporate security person who's monitoring the network will come looking for you and want to know why you're doing this.
That's my favorite message to deliver to a student. Because I say, hey guys, this is really cool. This is the only class you'll ever take where if you do the things I tell you, you'll get fired. And then they're like, oh, cool. And then they feel like they're getting the inside track, and then they listen. Because I get to learn something bad, it's cool. So really the message is security is everyone's job. If you can instill that message in people, then I feel like I've done my job here, because now you can all go out and instill the same message. It really has to happen at an individual level, or it's not going to happen at all. And I'll give it back to Jeff now. Okay,
what we've done is implemented 2 classes at this point in time. We've got a secure application or secure architecture principles class, which is really the fundamentals. It talks about the basics of Security 101, authorization, authentication, the whole security stack, talks about general vulnerabilities. It gives the scare tactics at the beginning to get people's attention. This is the one that's really geared toward everybody. Now, the way we originally designed this, this is probably something that should have been in the challenges, and it is kind of important. It's how do you effectively roll it out to engage the entire population? Well, I had to wrestle with what the length of these classes were going to be. To get people's time, developers' time for like a week is really a lot to ask, particularly if you're just starting out the program. So what we decided, we wanted to do the basics class as a half-day class, and do the second one, which is coding, secure coding practices, which is really a hacks and attacks class, and that's just for the developers, people who are actually doing web development, although we invited other developers because we still have some of those mainframe dinosaurs around somewhere. We invited those people to attend too.
Yeah, it'd be nice if you told me they were coming before I actually started teaching the class.
Yeah, well, we didn't know like one whole class was going to be mainframe.
I had to change a class from a web class to a mainframe class on the fly. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, unfortunately I didn't have those definitions of who's doing what. But anyway, we looked at what is going to be effective to start out, and we decided, well, we're going to do a half-day and a full-day class, and we're going to have the half-day class a prerequisite, and then the full-day class afterwards. It's a day and a half, reasonable amount of time to ask people to attend, even if you're a really, really, really busy developer. It's not like you're not doing anything else, right? I mean, how many people have surfed the net? Just a little bit. I'm sorry? Okay. You really need to try to figure out what that time span is going to be. Now, our next iteration of this, we're going to take the opportunity because of the success, and again, this is kind of an iterative approach. Build on the success. We're going to do a full-day security architecture principles class and a 2-day lab class, and we're confident that we're going to get the buy-in of the organization because they've already seen the value of the other classes. We talked about having a business level class. Well, the risks of insecure applications is a lecture that's geared towards upper level management to really have them sit down and really understand why security is necessary. So, let's see. In-house versus vendor, we talked about that. It made all the sense in the world for us to go outside to hire. Well, we started with At Stake, and it became Symantec, and the contract was up, and continued working with Rob. It was important to me to have continuity of the individual or individuals involved in delivering the class and developing the material. A lot of other business aspects, you look at things, you say, well, we need to, you don't want to necessarily single thread. In this case, it does make a lot of sense from my perspective. It's not critical. I don't have to worry so much about, if something bad happens, yeah, that, if we lost the contract at some point in time, that wouldn't necessarily be a great thing, but it's not going to be critical to the business. So it made a lot of sense for me in terms of how I was valuing who was going to continue with the with this program to keep the continuity. And there's a lot of value in Rob's knowledge of State Street and how it works, and his effectiveness as has become over the 35 classes we've given. Yeah, I mean that's a lot of knowledge of the organization and how to be effective, and that's worth a lot of, from my perspective. There's much benefit in that.
Thanks for the plug, Jeff.
Yeah, there you go. That was free too. Presentation format, yeah, we basically put together PowerPoints and deliver the message as Rob was just explaining to you in his techniques.
One of the things that's not on there that we actually do is we do a lot of instructor-led demos where I actually demonstrate, here's what the real issues are. It's not just, if you just do death by PowerPoint, you got to give people things that are tangible. You need to actually mix it up sometimes. I do this interesting exercise to demonstrate network sniffing, and again, steal this too, please, because it's very effective. You start on one side of the room, you hand somebody a piece of paper, and you say, write a message, what's your name? And I say, write a message, send it over to this person. We're all going to be nodes in the network, hand it off. And the only rule is you're not allowed to open the paper. You fold it in half again, and then I just have them hand it around. Of course, I inject myself in the process, take the paper, and I open it up, and then I hand it back off, and they say, hey, you broke the rules. I'm like, I know, that's how it works. That's how the game is played. There are no rules in this game, and that's the message I try to convey. And that works really well. So again, steal that. It works really well.
Creativity is obviously the key. We've got the lab class where we actually get on and do some hacking against test applications. And we're engaged in discussing the online computer-based training. That's something that is the next phase. Definitely like to do as an addendum to what we're doing today. And the last point, feedback. Feedback is very important to make sure that we keep delivering the message and we keep it pertinent. So
I'd just like to thank everybody for being here. And it's been a lot of fun putting on this conference and actually putting together this talk and the panel we did earlier. One of the things we'd really appreciate is if you have feedback forms, if you could fill them out, they're really helpful for us. I like to always read my feedback. And I actually would encourage you to request feedback from the people you present to find out what's effective. One of the most humbling and informative pieces of feedback I ever received was probably the second training class I ever did, ever. And the feedback form said, don't send technical people to be trainers. luckily I was doing, these were 2-hour training stints, so I was able to incorporate that feedback and do a bunch more of them, and over time I was able to kind of work through those kinks. But it's important to ask for feedback, otherwise how do you know how you're doing? So does anybody, we're running a little bit behind, but does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask either of us before we go? Sure. I saw this hand first.
This discussion sort of was focused on technical staff, developers and so forth.
Right.
Who are 1,000 of your 10 or 20,000 employees. What do you do for the other 9,000 or 19,000 unwashed masses who arguably are a much bigger source of problems?
That's not my job, Mr. Senator.
I'll take that one. So at State Street, we basically addressed the technical people first because that was their focus of concern, were the technical people, because they were the ones writing the high-risk applications for a $1 trillion company. But you're right. In my mind, it's not just the developers, it's not just the security folks, it is every single person in the corporation. And there's a number of ways to get that message out, right? I mean, as an industry, we're still working on this. If you look around and notice to your left and your right, they haven't figured it out either, We're still trying to figure this one out. But one of the ways is to, fill a room and have somebody like me show up and, scare the crap out of people for an hour or two. That's one way. Also, where people are starting to get into e-learning because one of the problems is if I show up, it's fine if I show up for a class or 2 classes or 10 classes, but if you have a huge company, it really becomes prohibitively expensive to take everybody offline all at once for that whole time. So that's where we're starting to see a lot of people that are in this space getting into e-learning. Now, one of the things I'll throw out there is that the way we're doing e-learning today isn't very effective. It's PowerPoints with a voiceover. That's one way. And it tends to, for end users, the unwashed masses, so to speak, we tend to focus on security hygiene. How to use antivirus properly, make sure you download your updates, don't click on email attachments. But, the issue is bigger than that. Every single person that interacts with the data the corporation is using is potentially putting that data at risk, no matter who they are. So it's a big issue we need to continue to address. Does that help?
Yeah, just in a previous life, I was the information security officer for a business unit in a large financial service company in Boston. Magellan Fund. One of my charters was to implement what we a proprietary protection of proprietary information program. I'm going to go back to the point that we made at the beginning of this one, and I think that's where you have to start whenever you're dealing with any type of security program. You got to define the problem, and you got to sell it to management. And the way that we did this was we actually had our security officers go around and identify problems. They did statistical study. They found, 3,242 sticky notes on the monitors. They found, 523 confidential reports lying in conference rooms. They did that kind of stuff, so we correlated that information, and I picked the top 5. And what I did was put a campaign around that. I actually left about 6 months after we began the program, so I couldn't, in all honesty, tell you how successful it was. But the whole idea was to focus in on those problems, and a manageable number of problems. Again, get management to understand what the issue was, and then deliver messages. And we delivered it in a lot of different ways. We went to staff meetings, we talked to managers, we issued edicts, we had memos that came out from the president of that group. But point being, start with the problem, define the problem, make it manageable when you define it, and then work from there. Because just to get awareness out for awareness sake is not going to work. Have an objective, look for something that you're going to resolve, and get management to buy in on it.
Jeff, in the past hour you've talked about the value of having Rob come personally and present and train your teams.
Oh, he's okay.
And you've also spoken about e-learning and moving in that direction as well.
Mm-hmm.
When would you use each?
Well, as I said, I think it's important, at least fundamentally, to get the target audience in front of a live trainer. The problem logistically is, how do you schedule that? And there's going to be gaps. Ideally, from a vision perspective, it would be nice on, day one when somebody comes in and gets trained. As part of that training, there's a level of security awareness training that they're going to have to attend to. And that would probably be done through computer-based training, so they'll go and sit down in front of